3 suns burn above Delarea. But it's the ambassador no oracle can foresee who holds the true mystery. Jace Ryder arrives as a diplomat, but the chip in his skull hides a secret that defies 4 million years of prophecy. When Sapphira of the Third Sight touches him, reality shivers. What happens when a civilization built on predicting futures meets a man with none? The Meridian's Edge completed its docking procedure against a station that refused architectural consistency. Its surfaces shimmered between solid matter and mere possibility, walls appearing to recede into other dimensions before snapping back into temporary positions. The ship's magnetic clamps made contact with a sound that wasn't quite a sound, more like a sensation of structural consent. Jace Ryder stepped through the airlock onto a ramp that seemed to extend only as his foot touched it. Above him, 3 suns hung in a delicate triangular formation, each casting light that contradicted the others. His shadow split into 3 faint replicas that shifted and merged as he moved, creating a disorienting dance of darkness around his feet. His earth-trained eyes struggled to focus, the overlapping illumination creating visual static at the edges of his vision. The gravity field felt like a gentle hand pushing him in multiple directions at once. One moment he felt heavier on his left side, then the pressure would shift to his right foot, then to the small of his back. It wasn't enough to make him stumble, but enough to remind him constantly that this world operated by different physical laws. His muscles tensed with each step, compensating for forces that refused to remain consistent. The air carried a metallic tang of ozone layered over a floral scent, unlike anything in Earth's botanical records. The combination made his sinuses ache slightly, a persistent reminder of his alien surroundings. Each breath felt like inhaling both a thunderstorm and a garden simultaneously. He repeated his cover story quietly, the words feeling increasingly inadequate. Trade negotiations for agricultural technology, cultural exchange programs, mutual scientific advancement. The phrases tasted like ash in this atmosphere. The deception weighed on him more heavily here, where reality itself seemed transparent. His intensive training had covered diplomatic protocols, linguistic nuances, and crisis management, but nothing had prepared him for a world where the ground seemed to think about solidity before becoming solid. Every movement forward required conscious effort, as if walking through a lucid dream where the dream might decide to become a nightmare. The temporal chip implanted at the base of his skull emitted a low-frequency hum, barely perceptible, but constant. He'd been told it was a universal translator upgrade, a story he'd accepted until recently. Now he suspected its purpose ran deeper, connected to the true nature of his mission here. Earth Command had sent him to test the limits of DeLorean prophecy, to see if their oracular systems could be deceived or compromised. But the first challenge was navigating a world where his own senses couldn't be trusted, where every physical law seemed negotiable. The station's beauty was undeniable, crystalline structures that refracted the triple sunlight into rainbows that moved like living things, floating gardens that rearranged themselves according to some unseen pattern, air that carried music from no discernible source. Yet beneath the breathtaking scenery lay a fundamental wrongness, a sense that this reality could unravel at any moment. His guide arrived without announcement, materializing from the shimmering air itself. She stood nearly a head taller than Jace, her form composed of shifting light and deep shadow that refused to hold a constant shape. The DeLoreans called her Sapphira of the Third Sight, and her introduction carried a weight that went beyond formal titles. She moved toward him with a fluidity that defied normal physics, each step appearing to barely touch the floor before gliding forward. Her motion created subtle distortions in the air around her, as if space itself accommodated her passage with minor adjustments. The effect was both beautiful and deeply unsettling, like watching water flow uphill without explanation. When she spoke her greeting, her voice contained frequencies that resonated in Jace's skeletal structure. The words translated through his implant, but the physical vibration traveled through his bones into his nervous system. It felt like hearing and being heard simultaneously, a two-way communication that bypassed normal auditory processing. The area around her seemed to warp visually, the walls behind her appearing to curve slightly as if viewed through imperfect glass. This distortion wasn't dramatic, just enough to notice, enough to remind him that her very presence interacted with reality in ways his human senses couldn't fully register. The air around her carried a scent like static electricity and distant rain. Her eyes held him with an intensity that felt both ancient and immediate. They weren't just looking at him, they seemed to be viewing multiple versions of him simultaneously, assessing possibilities and probabilities in the space between heartbeats. The knowledge in her gaze felt like staring into deep space and realizing the light reaching you had traveled for millennia. She extended a hand in what appeared to be a standard greeting gesture. Her fingers seemed composed of condensed light, shifting between transparency and solidity. Jace responded automatically, raising his own hand to meet hers. The moment their skin made contact, a surge of energy traveled up his arm. It wasn't electricity or pain, but something closer to raw data transmission. His vision blurred at the edges, the reception hall dissolving into a corridor of branching pathways. For less than a second, he saw countless versions of himself standing before countless versions of her, each interaction playing out simultaneously like a hall of mirrors reflecting potential realities. She withdrew her hand quickly, her luminous features showing the first genuine emotion he'd seen on a DeLorean face. Something close to surprise, though more analytical than emotional. The branching visions collapsed back into the single moment, the reception hall snapping back into focus around them. The formal greeting had lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but the after effect lingered in his nervous system like a remembered shock. His arm tingled with the ghost of that contact, the sensation of having been briefly connected to something vastly complex. The experience felt both like a warning of her capabilities and a promise of things he didn't yet understand. They stood facing each other in the shifting light of the station, the moment stretching beyond normal social conventions. She recovered her composure first, her expression returning to the neutral mask of diplomatic courtesy. But something had changed in how she regarded him, a new watchfulness, a reassessment happening behind those ancient eyes. The air between them seemed charged with unasked questions. She turned to lead him deeper into the station, her movements once again effortlessly graceful. Jace followed, his mind replaying those fragmented seconds of contact, trying to parse what exactly had passed between them in that exchange. His mission parameters felt suddenly inadequate, the simple test of their oracular systems now complicated by a personal connection he hadn't anticipated. He walked behind her, watching how the very light bent around her form, and understood that his carefully constructed cover story might already be transparent to this being. The game had changed in that handshake, though he couldn't yet determine how or why. Jace walked through corridors that reformed behind him, the briefing from Earth Command echoing in his mind with the precision of a recorded message. Maintain the diplomatic cover, speak only of trade agreements and cultural exchange, reveal nothing of the chip, nothing of the real purpose. His instructions were clear, absolute, and increasingly difficult to embody as the station's reality shifted around him. He had rehearsed the lines about agricultural technology, about potential artistic collaborations between their civilizations. The words felt hollow, inadequate for the complexity surrounding him. He was here to discuss crop rotation patterns with beings who could see multiple futures simultaneously. The absurdity of the cover story tightened his throat. The temporal chip at the base of his skull remained silent, its presence known only through the occasional warmth that spread through his neural pathways. Even he didn't know its full specifications, only that it represented technology generations beyond official Earth capabilities. Its developers remained classified, its origins blacker than space. The device was designed to interface with DeLorean prediction systems, to test whether their oracles could be deceived, or whether their visions remained accurate when confronted with technology they shouldn't be able to anticipate. He paused before a wall that flowed like liquid metal, catching his reflection in its shimmering surface. He practiced the smile he would need, the carefully calibrated expression of friendly curiosity that hid the operative beneath. His mouth moved into the shape of diplomacy, while his eyes remained those of an intruder. The reflection showed a man divided, the pleasant expression not reaching the assessment in his gaze. The wonder of first contact warred with the weight of his deception. He observed floating sculptures that seemed to contain entire galaxies within their crystalline structures, heard music that changed based on the listener's emotional state, and all the while carried a secret that could undermine this entire civilization's understanding of reality. The beauty around him felt like a gift he was preparing to exploit. His presence here represented Earth's greatest gamble, an attempt to understand, whether the DeLorean's predictive abilities represented an insurmountable advantage or whether there were gaps in their perception of time. He was a test subject walking into an examination he didn't understand, his movements potentially being measured against models of probability he couldn't comprehend. Each interaction took on multiple layers of meaning. When he complimented the architecture, he was actually assessing defensive capabilities. When he asked about their art, he was probing their cognitive patterns. Every handshake became an intelligence-gathering operation. Every exchanged pleasantry a potential security breach waiting to happen. The success of his mission depended entirely on maintaining the fiction. One slip, one moment where the chip's activity became detectable, and 4 million years of oracular tradition would be examining him, not as a diplomat but as an anomaly. The DeLorean's reaction to discovering the deception was impossible to predict. Their civilization had never encountered something they couldn't anticipate. He adjusted his formal jacket, the earth-made fabric feeling coarse compared to the flowing materials worn by the DeLoreans. He was an observer sent to be observed, a spy whose cover depended on being completely transparent while hiding the most important truth of all. The station hummed around him, a living system that seemed to watch his every step, and he moved forward into what felt increasingly like a trap, designed specifically for whatever he represented. The chamber doors opened onto a circular space that seemed to absorb sound and light. The Council of Oracles sat arranged in a semicircle, their forms indistinct in the low illumination. They didn't appear to be sitting on chairs so much as being supported by the air itself, positioned at varying heights that created a three-dimensional composition of power. The air hummed with a frequency that felt like time itself being processed, a constant low vibration that resonated in Jace's teeth. The Prime Oracle occupied the central position, her form more defined than the others. When she spoke, her voice carried the texture of sand shifting across millennia, each word sounding like it contained echoes from countless other moments. She greeted him with formal diplomatic phrases, her words perfectly polite yet carrying an undertone of immense age and distance. Her attention felt like a physical weight, a pressure against his consciousness. The council members observed him with a curiosity that felt entirely analytical, devoid of suspicion or hostility. Their gaze reminded him of scientists examining a novel specimen, their interest purely intellectual. He felt himself being measured against patterns and data accumulated over 4 million years. His entire existence compared against a database of probabilities that spanned epochs. The sensation was unnervingly precise, as if they were mapping the exact contours of his being against everything they had ever known. They engaged him in the expected diplomatic conversation, discussing potential trade agreements and cultural exchanges with flawless professionalism. Their questions about Earth's agricultural methods and artistic traditions were perceptive and informed, but he could sense their true focus lay elsewhere. Their polite conversation merely a surface activity masking deeper investigation. Their eyes remained fixed on him with an intensity that saw past his diplomatic facade. A warmth spread through the base of his skull as the temporal chip activated. The sensation was subtle, like a patch of sunlight moving across his skin, but it marked the moment the device began interfacing with their environment. He maintained his diplomatic composure, continuing to answer their questions about Earth's cultural heritage while feeling the unfamiliar technology working within him. The oracles continued their polite questioning, but their attention had shifted entirely to whatever data the chip was generating. Their eyes saw through the human diplomat to the technological anomaly beneath, their expressions remaining neutral but their focus becoming increasingly intense. They were searching for something specific in the probability matrix, some expected pattern that his presence should have created. The chamber grew quiet as their collective perception shifted. The humming frequency that filled the room changed from harmonious to dissonant, creating a sense of cognitive static that made the air feel thick. The oracle's form seemed to become more focused, their attention narrowing to a single point of investigation. The polite pretense of diplomatic exchange faded away completely, replaced by pure analytical concentration. They found nothing where there should have been complex probability patterns. Not a hidden future, not a shielded probability, but a complete absence. The void in their matrix was absolute, a blank space in their perception where Jace's future should have been radiating possibilities. For beings who could see all potential outcomes, This emptiness represented something beyond their understanding. The silence stretched, broken only by the dissonant hum of their collective perception, struggling to process the impossibility before them. The Prime Oracle's ancient eyes remained fixed on Jace, her expression showing the first hint of something resembling confusion. The other council members maintained their positions, but their forms seemed to vibrate with the effort of comprehension. They had encountered the one thing their civilization had never imagined possible, a being with no foreseeable future at all. The Prime Oracle spoke without elaboration, her words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "There is a void in the matrix surrounding you." The statement hung in the air, simple and devastating. For a civilization built upon predictability, her declaration represented a fundamental break in their understanding of reality. Her voice remained calm, but the implications vibrated through the chamber, like a struck bell. Where Ambassador Jace Ryder's future should have existed, a fan of possibilities radiating from his present choices, there was only emptiness. The Council's sensors detected no branching paths, no probable outcomes, no statistical projections. His temporal signature showed as absolute null, a complete absence where their science expected to find complex probabilistic patterns. It wasn't that his future was obscured or protected. Their instruments simply could not register anything beyond his present moment. For beings whose entire existence revolved around perceiving potential outcomes, this void represented something more disturbing than any catastrophic prediction, a terrible fate they could prepare for, a disadvantageous timeline they could avoid. But absolute uncertainty undermined the very foundation of their civilization. The silence where there should have been data felt like a structural failure in their perception of reality. Sapphira watched Jace with her luminous eyes, the curiosity she had shown during their first meeting now tempered by apprehension. Her analytical gaze had shifted to something closer to concern, as if she were watching someone standing at the edge of a cliff they couldn't see. The confidence that had characterized her movements now showed subtle hesitation, a reevaluation happening in real time. The council members exchanged glances that conveyed entire conversations without words. Their forms seemed to shimmer with the effort of processing this anomaly. The dissonant hum in the chamber intensified as their collective perception struggled to accommodate something outside their experience. For the first time in their long history, they faced a complete unknown. They had encountered beings with difficult-to-read futures, species with unusual temporal signatures, even entities that existed across multiple timelines simultaneously, but never anything like this absolute void. Every living thing they had ever studied showed some pattern of potential outcomes, however faint or complex. The human ambassador represented a category error in their understanding of existence. Jace stood before them, feeling the weight of their collective attention. The temporal chip in his skull remained active, its purpose suddenly clear in a way that chilled him. Earth hadn't sent him to test their predictions. They had sent him because he had no future to predict. The device wasn't designed to interface with their systems, but to create this exact void, to demonstrate that humanity could operate outside their models of reality. The Council's confusion was palpable in the air, a tension that felt both intellectual and visceral. Their certainty about how the universe worked had encountered something that shouldn't exist according to their laws. The human ambassador didn't just represent an unknown variable. He was a living refutation of their most fundamental principles.